Going to try that again. Think I had some mic issues. So good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar, Drive Lean Process Transformation with Low-Code Business Apps. My name is Nicole Jones, and I'm the Content Manager for Kintone, a low-code application and process management platform. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. So you should see your attendee interface on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default, but if you prefer to join over phone or have trouble hearing from your computer, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. And you can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll be sure to collect those and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve McGee and Morio Itozu of Shinka Advisors. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for your interest in the webinar. I'm Morio Itozu.
And I'm Steve McGee. We're partners with Shinka Advisors. We're management consultants helping with growth problems caused by lack of execution, which is usually a problem with flow. We understand how knowledge work is optimized, and we like Kintone because it scales and evolves naturally, just like the emerging processes in knowledge work does, and we really like improving business processes with no hassle. We have a poll, and we'd like to get a sense of everybody's experience with process mapping and improvement. So some of you probably have some background. It looked like some of you might have even been involved in Six Sigma training in the past. Perhaps some of you have never used a tool like Kintone before, and we just kind of are curious what are people's backgrounds and what's the comfort level, and there might be some insight we can get here that can help us focus on a particular aspect in our presentation. It looks like a majority have been involved in business analysis to some degree, and there's some potential Shingo Award winners. If you know what that means, you can look it up in Wikipedia. But yeah, there's sort of a wide variety of experience here, and that's what we were expecting, so that's perfect. So what's the problem? Bureaucratic high-control systems play a vital role to avoid bankruptcy or violations, but inevitably they have gaps in their solution. And these kinds of gaps are filled by action-oriented managers with ad hoc tools assembled in Excel or even Post-it notes. These workarounds are fragile and they lack transparency. They might help you, but leveraging technology available today could really enable more collaboration and more productivity.
In this webinar, we will review the story of a title company that applied a simple four-step approach to better understand 1. How they got things done, 2. Made improvements immediately, and 3. Got others on board. Our case example is a tile company.
They create custom tiles for sale over the internet. They use vendors to produce their samples and also fulfill the orders. Their office and their warehouse are in different cities. Their online store attracts a new type of homeowner customers, quite different than their previous commercial customers. Their workflow management really held them back. They had so much work in progress, especially with the new online capability, that it was hard to keep up with tracking everything. They had very inconsistent service levels and were receiving complaints. And they were taking way too long for servicing their new type of customer who just wanted to remodel a kitchen or a bath. Let's look at what they did to overcome these problems. The solution was to approach how they think about their work with a service orientation, which is that enterprises are an interconnected group of services that request and deliver work to each other.
It's a four-step process. Step 1, define service boundary. Step 2, analyze demand and capability. Step 3, model the workflow. Step 4, build your system.
This solution is gaining a lot of popularity. Although it's based on a decades-old approach created by manufacturers, it's rapidly increasing adoption in intangible knowledge work environments because it gets managers to talk to each other and improve things. The first step is to define the boundaries of your service. Take a look at the way you work, what activities you do, who your customers are, and how work flows through, how you build on the work as it moves towards completion.
This is knowledge work, so don't worry about being perfect. It involves. Don't turn this into documentation. Be ready to throw it away. Sounds technical, but you already know all this. We can use normal language.
And just try to define things, your service, as the blank service. For example, the payroll service, recruiting service, training service. Or at a restaurant, the busing service, the cooking service, the waiting service. These examples show multiple services that a single department might manage. As you go through the rest of the steps, you'll understand your boundary even more. Our goal is to sort all the work you do by type. So we start with analyzing demand. Ask these questions for each work item you can think of.
Demand analysis, frequency, nature, and expectations.
By going through this process, filling out this table, you make the implicit explicit. This helps overcome a major hurdle to getting agreement about what you should change. I can tell you in this case example, this list changed and evolved a lot as they talked about it. And they looked at the next steps, step 3 and step 4, and they shared it with others. And that's okay. You don't have to get it right in the start. You just have to keep working on it till you get it right. The next part is to analyze capability. What you can do historically, data is what matters, not estimates. How you meet the expectations and how you measure up to 4 standard KPI around flow and quality.
These are different from what most people measure, usually tracking for someone else like a finance. The standard metrics for flow are not complicated, but since usually nobody is tracking them, there's no data. So by moving on to step 3 and 4, you can start collecting them. There are tips in the handout we have for you today.
If you have trouble analyzing the capability on your own, for example, if you don't have metrics, you can always start by going to your customers, internal business customers, with a notepad and a pen and asking what they have to say about it. Again, it's not necessary to make this complex. You want it to be simple so others understand it.
Don't worry about special markup or symbols. Draw what makes sense.
So just model your workflow. We recommend use a whiteboard. Draw out how you add value. What are the steps in the process? For each of these steps, mark up who's involved. Who are the managers? Are there other groups involved? And invite others to give input, even your vendors. Here's an example of the tile company's process of going through the step 3. At first, they narrowed down all the work types to just 4. They modeled the workflow for each work type, just looking at the location or the organization that did the work for each step. They realized that the workflow and typical lead time for small custom orders was basically the same as when they were just trying to make a sample. After talking to vendors, they realized that sometimes they could do custom orders much faster. and they could offer faster service for a higher price. Another issue that came up after talking with account managers, problems when what was in stock was not accurately reflected on the website. So finally, you can see across the top the general workflow, as the work passes through each different team or even vendors. There's 3 vendor types: design shops, manufacturers, and shipping. The team settled on 3 work types with one exception: when they require design service. You can see how it evolved and why a whiteboard and throwaway documentation is best at this stage. They were ready to define how the application should be built at this point. So how does this sound? Are you ready to try it? Will going through this process prepare you to create an app in Kintone and implement it? Got another poll? Remember, your system will evolve. Just putting into use this 4-step process into use will show you opportunities to improve. The impact for error is really low, and the likelihood for learning is really high.
One difference between high control and high productivity is that high control requires getting everything right before you start coding. It involves a lot of speculations. Kintone can involve, so it's better just start and keep others involved, then update it and improve.
Great. Looks like a bunch of people have already even started, and people seem to feel relatively comfortable with moving forward. Just another reminder, there is a handout that you can access through the control panel that has some additional tips to explain these steps if you are interested, and we also will be answering questions afterwards. But now we'd like to take a look at how a company like our example tile company can implement their system in a high productivity application platform as a service using Kintone.
All right, so now I'm going to introduce our business sales engineer, Brian Chung. He's going to show us what this looks like when we implement it with Kintone.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Switch desktops here. All right, so now we're going to take what Steve and Mario have been talking about with the process transformation and pretty much present a visualization of how this tile company transformed their process and transformed their workflow using this low-code platform here. On this main dashboard, we have a few different things going on. On the left-hand side, we have the different stages and phases that the different orders of tile companies and their clients go through. For example, we have 6 different stages: receive, design, vendor, warehouse delivery, and approve. And below each of those stages, we have different phases that they go through. And we'll see how that pans out as we go throughout the system. As I scroll down, this graph is a representation of the different orders that are active. And I can click into the pie chart and actually see the different records, the number of records, the percentage, and the different stages. I scroll down a little more and I see the lead time for the design stage and who the owner is. In this case, Stephanie, for example, has an average of 5 days for her design time. And I scroll down even further and I see the breakdown of the different phases and their stages. For example, I see that the Count Ironwood is in the received stage, and currently within the received phase it's accepted. So now as I scroll back up, I see on the right-hand side a few different things. I see the members of this that are a part of these different orders. I see I can open up threads for communication. But right now the focus is in this order database here. And as I go into this order database, we see a list view of a few different things and a few different details. All these different columns are configurable. For example, I can either not have this or not have this type column here. I can adjust and sort and filter. For example, if I wanted to sort by status, I can do that. Sort by assignee, I can also do that. And as we look through all these different records, I see, for example, myself, I have a account for SC where the owner is Sean, and I can see all the lead times that match up with this account. And for additional details, I can go to the left-hand side and click the icon, the record details icon. And we see this representation that Steve and Mario were talking about, where you make the implicit explicit. And even further, I can go and edit this page. And all these different fields I can definitely customize and configure. For example, I selected a single choice for the type, but I can make that a drop-down. I can make that a single line text and such. As I go down further, I see the stages and phases, as a reminder. And here we see the actual visual representation of the workflow. At first, I had ownership of the received stage, and I clicked accepted as well as adjusted the time. And then we moved the workflow along, and the owner was Dave, and he approved it, and this was his lead time. All the way through Travis, Jana, and now it's back to me or Natalie to handle. And right now it's in the delivery stage where I can select the phase. And once that order has been shipped and received, I can go ahead and select the time. For example, today is the 4th, and I select the time right now. And now it automatically calculates the lead time. And once I'm done with this, I can go ahead and click Save and actually move it to the delivery stage so that Richard can handle it from here. If I wanted to, I could further collaborate and inform Richard of any mishaps or things he should be aware of. And he'll get that notification. And now I navigate to the application settings. And here are all the different settings that you can configure and customize. And this really speaks to that iterative process that Steve and Mario are touching on. For example, I go to the form page, and you might have different things going on. For example, let's say stock orders aren't a big thing anymore, so we can adjust this if we need to. If we needed to add a new owner, we could go ahead and do that. For example, we have a new member on the team. Harmony is a new member. Go ahead and add her. You can keep going on, and all of these different fields have different settings that you can adjust. So now that we added Harmony, we can actually start a new order with her. Go ahead and update this app. And very easily, I can click the Add Record icon. And you see that Harmony is now a member that I can designate as an owner of this process. And you can continue to fill out the rest of the order. And you saw that there are a few different fields that I myself could not edit, and that's because I had different permission rights and such, and that's very easy to edit. For example, I go here, And now, if I wanted to add a field, for example, let's say I want, Harmony to have access to most of the fields, but not the accepted stage. So I go ahead and add Harmony, or anyone else in this page. And right now we see that Richard can view this field, but he can't edit it. So we have very granular permission rights that the administrators can set. And there you have it. Very easily you can visualize the workflow and make that happen in this low-code, no-code platform.
All right, so we're just logging back in real quick, but in the meantime, we've got a question. This one's actually for Brian from Nowco, and she would like to know, how can you set up lead time using Kintone? Now, I know you talked about this a little bit, but if you could touch on that again, Brian.
Sure. And so basically what happens is you have, for that, very easily you can set 3 fields, one being the start time, and that's, that can be a date, time field, or a date and time field. And then you have the same setting for the end time, or end date. And then what we can do in Kintone is actually leverage a calculation field where it takes the start, or subtracts the start time from the end time, and there you will have the lead time.
Great, thank you, Brian. So we're going to switch back now to Steve and Mario and talk a little bit about what you had just seen. So let's switch controls, one moment.
Well, thanks a lot, Brian. I want to just point out that all along we were talking about sharing these ideas, your workflow, your demand analysis, sharing it with other people in the company, other people in your team, and to get their input. Handling the people side of the implementation might be your struggle. Sometimes the challenge is permission. Does the budgeting support your change? Are there policies that you might have to overcome to make some of these improvements? We recommend a specific approach to change management, making an offer they can't refuse. You want to reverse the permission asking dynamic. So takeaways are always involve others, solve a bigger problem. If you focus on just trying to solve your own problem, it's harder to get buy-in from people. You get buy-in by offering to improve your service to these other people. That's the offer they can't refuse. Now let us know if you want to learn more about this type of aspect of getting change and implementing Kintone. And we have saved time for questions. We've already started with some of these questions. And we'd like to,
So I can go ahead and start to facilitate some questions. I know there's a little bit of an echo there. All right, so we've got, and please take some time to answer, or I should say ask questions just in the questions pane, and give you a few moments, and I believe we've got a question coming already. This one is for Shinka advisors. What if I have trouble defining my service boundary?
That's a good question. I want to remind people again that in the control panel there's a handout and it lists the 4 steps with a couple of tips. But just in general about your service boundary, I think just thinking about it and talking to some of the people that you work with regularly, you could map it out relatively well, like who your team is and who's your customer. And even more important than that is to just get started with mapping out the workflow and sharing this with other people, and you're going to learn, and the understanding of your service boundary continues to emerge as you start talking to other people, because it's really going to be a question of all of the exceptions to the standard way things work, that's where you're going to find the boundary.
It is very important to think about end-to-end flow.
Yes.
Yeah, where the customer request happened or demand happened, and then all the teams involved to satisfy the outcomes. So rather than thinking about my department, my team would work, you should think about flow to satisfy the end customers or users.
All right, another question here. Permissions indicated view and edit options. Is there a constraint for allowing a member to create data in a field? And if not explicit, please explain how that privilege is granted for each member. So I believe, Brian, that's a good question for you.
Sure. Of course, we definitely, like I said, we do have granular permission rights, and that does include creating fields or going into a field and adding data, or even we do have view-only access to certain records or the app itself. So the 3 main levels are app, record, and fields, and what I showed you in this demo were the fields. But you can definitely move one step up or 2 steps up to where certain users can or cannot see the entire application, or can or cannot see certain records.
Excellent. This next question is from Catherine. How specific do I need to be with the types of work?
So in the case, there was the example of they narrowed down all of the different types of work to just 4. In that part of the process, that was about 30 minutes to an hour of talking among team members, just brainstorming all the different work orders that they had received or different internal things that they had to deal with. They just brainstormed a whole bunch, and then they went through a process of trying to combine them or sort them by which are similar and basically the same. And the list was really long. Then they started trying to think of, well, so what is the workflow for these work item types? And at that point, they started to really recognize that a whole lot of things that they could say are different work items or different types, they still flow through exactly the same process. So they realized, well, let's just call all of these big orders. That's a huge bucket for like different types of orders because of all the different vendors or all the different people or the different ceramic versus concrete, so many different changes or things to be specific. But their goal was to make the work item type something that everyone in the company would know what they mean, and they would know what should happen to it. That's really the goal. And so my recommendation is try to have the least amount of types you need so that everybody knows what you're talking about and nobody's confused about what should be happening to that work next.
But just only you to create the types. I think the people involved the work should attend and get the brainstorming using sometimes the post-its and the wall, creating a more team's concept rather than one single individual idea of the types. That is very important, and it is a kind of the leading to get agreement and everybody involved, the whole process.
Great. We still have time for some questions. So if you haven't yet, go ahead. You can type out your question in the questions pane. We can also answer some questions after the webinar just by emailing myself, Nicole at Kintone.com. But let's go ahead and take this question from Chris. What's the difference between quality and compliance? And that sounds like a Shinka advisor's question.
So one of the first things that we recognize or we encounter when we start working with people is that there's general nomenclature, like the way that the literature or generally consultants talk about work, and then there's also every individual company has their own terms and their own way of saying things. So just as another aside, for an example, when we were first building this tool in Kintone for the tile company had their way of describing things like the stage or the status, and it was different than the terms that were used in the Kintone tool out of the box. But Brian was able to just change all those names to match the phrases and the terms that the tile company employees were already used to. So that's actually a major benefit, is you can just go in and edit that kind of stuff. I'm telling you, it's not easy to overcome institutional terminology. It's very hard to get people to change what they call things. So just to answer specifically the question, quality versus what was it? Quality compliance. In the standard 4 KPI metrics, compliance is things like safety. It's either yes or no. You meet the threshold or you don't. Compliance like you are compliant with SOX or Sarbanes-Oxley. That's the same thing. Dodd-Frank. Different type of financial standards. There may be policies within the company, like certain things have to meet, get a certain approval. Japanese companies, you need to get all the stamps on the ringgit form, or you can't move it forward. That would be compliance. Whereas quality, it could be very numerical, like how many defects per million. I tell you, knowledge work, and it's not million. It's like how many defects in like 15 or 20. But is it good enough or not good enough? Within software, the metrics are really obvious. When you're not in the software industry, the metrics can be more difficult. But there's things like Net Promoter Score or customer satisfaction surveys or other type of what's the word for a non-numerical?
Metrics and
qualitative type of terms that you can use, and these are things you can program into Kintone if you want to track quality specifically. Is you can make just a drop-down field of narrative terms to rate work by a certain quality standard.
And especially in this area, each company has their own rules and principles. So just listed all the things, and Kintone has the ability to adjust and include creating the metrics. So that is one of the strong point.
Yeah.
The Kintone's showing the ability to adjust, and the compliance is nowadays very important. This is much more black and white stuff, and for HR, the HIPAA you have to follow.
Right.
So your system has to adjust those abilities, and those laws particularly changing every year. So you need to adjust all the time.
Right.
No, once you build, that's not over. You have to constantly adjust and change to the market and the customer's request or governmental required. So that's important.
Great. Looks like we've got time for one more question here. Question is, within a service boundary, different participants in the same organization may have different understandings or definitions for the same term. Do you ensure all participants or members have the same understanding of terms before you get to step 2? Are semantic models developed?
The last phrase, are semantic models developed, that's absolutely the best way to describe what ends up happening. This is, this 4-step process we've reiterated. you want to involve other people. And so that means it's a collaborative process, which then by definition means it emerges. So let's say we're here in Silicon Valley right now, and in most of the buildings around us, there's companies that have engineers and they have product teams. And those are totally different tribes, and they need each other to be able to do any work, but their backgrounds are totally different. What they're trying to do is totally different. The engineers may have their way of talking about stuff, and they talk about work one way. The product side has their own way of talking about work and the way they like to say things. And once you can start bridging functional and organizational boundaries and have work and collaboration happen across those type of silos, one of the things that ends up happening is the words and the terms people use need to get worked out. But by making sure you stay out of Visio, stay out of documentation, that adds a level of formality to this process. Writing stuff on whiteboards, writing things on sticky notes that you can just throw into the trash. It helps people not get attached to things until the right thing emerges, the thing that makes sense to the most people. Because remember, the goal is that people know, given the work that they have in front of them, they know what should happen next.
And that the process of the visualization is powerful, and that at the beginnings you don't have to have the expensive software to visualize the workflow. Only people got together and they discuss about their view or perception of the work and the workflow. And then you can create the application software to visualize the workflow. And then once people see it, everybody can understand what is the problem and the bottom line. Then they can try to solve the problem rather than you are told, you ordered to solve the problems. Everybody will participate in the solutions rather than focusing on the personal agendas. So I think that the visualization is very important to change the work now. And the Kintone is very helpful to create the visualization. Yeah, the seeing is the believing, basically.
Actually, there's something I want to point out that so when Brian was given the demo, so I worked in the software industry in a content management system business several years ago, and a lot of the customers that we had were used to just taking not the latest version of software, but whatever was available and implementing it. And so the way people expect making collaboration or productivity software work and implementing it, it's based on like 1995 or 2000 era technology. And so they think, I can't make any mistakes when I design my workflow and then program it into my software. Because if I've made a mistake, I can't update it, and now I'm going to have all these problems. That's still true with high control software. Like you have to make a change request and go to IT and put it into their queue and their backlog of like work they're going to do to make the software work for you. With something like Kintone, with this low-code high productivity software, that's totally not an issue. I don't know if you could recognize the power of this type of high productivity software, where you add somebody to the team and you just plug them in and change their roles and permissions, and they can instantly start working. And if your process is like is an approved SDLC audited and compliant process that you have to follow, you can still add and remove members into a system that meets standards like that without breaking anything or without having to go through a long process and waiting for people to be able to use the productivity software that you're paying for. That's a real benefit. I would encourage you to just start playing with it, because just by trying to figure out how to put your work into a tool like Kintone, first of all, this is one of the ways you start to understand what your workflow is better, and you can start making improvements. But the next part is you can see how flexible it is and how you can start involving other people, even outside of your service, to get involved in the workflow in a more end-to-end type of a process. So we'd like to finish with another poll. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, this is where I went, yeah. What kind of challenges do you see yourself facing as you move forward with defining your business processes, with implementing high productivity software, with involving other people in your efforts to improve processes, or with involving other people into integrating their workflow into your workflow so that managers can have better insight into what's going on and what should happen next? Looks like this is actually making me happy here. We have 0 people saying that they have a permission problem. Oh, sorry, I have to take that back. But yes, often, okay. I think probably if we asked the same question in 2014, was the 4th question, permission to implement the cloud service, there would have been probably a high frequency of people saying that. But in general, CIOs, compliance people, legal people worried about getting in trouble. They've come to recognize that cloud is probably more secure than what you're doing on premise. Right. But there's still an issue with that. But the majority is in the second 2. It looks like setting the thing up, configuration, or overcoming resistance in company politics. Those might go hand in hand. Sometimes asking somebody, for example, people in another department, we need your data to port into my tool so that I can do a better job of providing you service. Sometimes just getting people to allow you to get that data is hard. Another a political issue sometimes is just we want you to get an account so you can log in and start managing your work in my tool so I can see what you're doing, and people want to continue to use things that they're used to, like the Excel or just email or chat. So those are often issues. And there's a quarter of the people they're still saying other, and I'm curious if people could be more specific about that. If you can make a note in the questions box about what other issues you might be facing, and we can address those. But thanks for this poll. So I guess one question about configuration with other systems. I'm going to anticipate that probably one of the questions is how can I get data from, for example, our Oracle or our other ERP implementation? How can I get that data into my Kintone implementation so that it helps me? Brian, are you able to make a comment about how to, what's the process of pulling data from outside other than manually?
Sure. Yeah, just as a note, speaking about the manual point, the most common way to get data is through the most common and simple ways to extract the data into a query from your database and plug that in via CSV. But now another solution would be leveraging command line utility, setting that up, and pretty much getting that data to flow from whatever either a file or folder or a database and having that flow into Kintone. Yet another one is we have open API, so depending on what kind of database you want to pull from, we could also set that up as a solution.
I'm thinking, so there's a lot of, not a majority, but a lot of people also mentioned that overcoming resistance and company politics is another issue. Often, the larger the company, the more problems you're going to end up having. and that has to do with multiple managers in the middle of the company who are responsible for different groups of people. But, for example, I'm a manager responsible for my team, but in order for us to be able to succeed, some other people in a different team have to do their job. And one of the benefits of going through a collaborative process to define your workflow, meaning going to those other teams and asking them to give their input to how you decided to map the workflow, one of the benefits of that is you start talking to these other teams. And when they can see, sometimes, it's not always the case, but sometimes when they can see what it is you guys need to do for the work that you do, because they don't do your work, and that's usually a black box to them. But when they can start to see what it is you need to do, then ideas that only people like them could have, because they're the only ones who know how they do their jobs, those ideas can come to the surface and can be available to you, and then together you can start to streamline or improve your business processes. But without that, by keeping people isolated functions, you don't get this type of insight sharing. So just trying to get collaborating and starting. When everybody's remote, so when you're not all in the same place and can't look at the same whiteboard, there's things like cobbling something together quickly in a PowerPoint slide, or making a drawing on a whiteboard and taking a photograph of it. Maybe when you were looking at the photograph of the tile company, their workflow, it didn't make sense to you, but if you worked in that company, it would definitely make sense to you, because you know what all those terms mean, and you know how, in general what the work is. So I would encourage even just trying to share something that way. But like Mario was saying earlier, don't try to turn it into a very heavily, don't make it a formal documentation process, because it's very difficult to change and upgrade those things once they get created.
And I think that, again, that in order to get the collaboration, I think that the people need to see what's going on, and that now the workflow can be visible. You can make it visible. Before, there is no way to do it. But now the technology is there, and you can use it, technology smartly, so you can see the end-to-end process of the company easily. And once people are seeing those things, it's easy for the people to join the team and wants to improve.
So thank you very much for attending. Looks like we've answered all the questions. We hope you have a clear sense of how you can get started. Sounds like some people have already started, at least half of you, and that's really encouraging. And if anybody has further questions about how to get started with this stuff, how to use Kintone, how to apply this process.
Just want to encourage everyone, of course, then to try Kintone for free. Get started. We'll be there to help you along the way. But the best way is just to dive right in. We have excellent support who's ready to take any questions that you have. So there's the link. I've also included it in the chat box. If you'd like to see this webinar in white paper form, just to get a review and to see all the slides up close, then I would encourage you to download the white paper. It's also included in the link on the slide and on the chat. And then for more information about Shinka Advisors and professional services, check out our training and consulting page. That's the link. I've also included it in the chat, all those resources. And we'll also be following up within 24 hours with more details about this information, in addition to a recording of today's webinar, so you can view it as many times as you'd like and share it with other people. When we end this webinar, you will be receiving a survey. If you can please fill that out, that would help us to know how we can better help you. You'll also receive that via email if for some reason you need to get going. But along the way, we're here to help, and we thank you very much. Thank you to our presenters, Shinka Advisors. And thank you to Brian. Have a wonderful rest of your day and hope to talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.